My next patron question is from Andrew, who'd like to know when it comes to live-action movies set in a fantasy or science fiction setting where physical logic is not necessarily on par with reality, what makes an action scenario seem physically ridiculous in your opinion? I'm someone who finds, for the most part, when you introduce a fantasy or science fiction element in a movie, you can largely get away with almost anything. Of course, there are rules they have to abide by, but I think a lot of storytellers and filmmakers like working in these genres because it gives them more freedom to take their characters to outlandish places. However, there can indeed be times when the movie can go a bit overboard and stretch things a little too much. A franchise that has had an interesting sliding scale between plausible and absurd is James Bond. A lot of people know of the gadgets and equipped cars that Q supplies to 007, and many of the films manage to make them work within the context of the world established. But there are exceptions, like a lot of what's shown in Die Another Day. That was a movie that seemed to throw every absurd idea into it, no matter how outlandish. So you have scenes that involve James Bond driving an invisible car and surfing on an icy tsunami. These movies were not above putting him in crazy scenarios, but these were stepped way too far and looked silly to boot. In a similar vein, action movies like that will usually have the heroes pulling stunts that would ordinarily be incredibly dangerous and result in life-threatening injuries, but they then tend to walk away with just a scratch. There are so many times when James Bond, Jason Bourne, and Ethan Hunt should have died or ended up in the hospital. Instead, they'll be shown wiping some dust from their shirt and then run off to the next action sequence with maybe a couple of facial injuries to show for it. I think that's one reason Die Hard stands out among action movies, as John McClane is shown having a bunch of serious injuries and actually reacting to things like other people would. Although, interesting enough, the main reason Roger Ebert did not like Die Hard was he thought the actions of the deputy police chief down on the ground were implausible. He bought the rest of the movie, but that character was apparently a step too far. Of course, movies that seem capable of doing anything are superhero movies, with the Marvel Cinematic Universe especially throwing every possibility from talking alien trees to jumping between multiverses. In contrast, Christopher Nolan's Batman movies strive to be as realistic as possible. Maybe the most fantastical element that occurs in those movies involves the Scarecrow's fear toxin. I do think this led to people being overly nitpicky about some plot points in The Dark Knight Rises. I don't think many people would question Iron Man or the Incredible Hulk traveling across the world and arriving in their home city, but somehow the Bruce Wayne in the Nolan films doing it was perceived as unrealistic, even though it actually is not. As a billionaire, he probably has contacts around the world who he could meet and procure himself a ticket back to the United States. Then there's the fact that he probably knows every nook and cranny in Gotham City, including every secret passageway. So yes, it's absolutely plausible for Bruce to sneak past Bane's goons and get back into the city he has known since childhood. But that's an example of something other people find implausible, but I don't. Something I do find absurd is what we're frequently told in the Jurassic World movies. A major plot point in them is that people got bored with dinosaurs quickly, and that's why InGen had to create new hybrid dinosaurs to keep up interest, and why in the newest movie natural history museums are closing. I'm sorry, but in no reality will people get bored with dinosaurs. People are still going to zoos and see animals that have never even went extinct, with stories about pandas being born usually eliciting awes from anyone with a beating heart. Even 50 years after the release of Jaws, people remain fascinated with sharks, and National Geographic produces something like 20 shark specials and documentaries per year. So I think people would absolutely remain interested in the fact that John Hammond and his team of scientists somehow found a way to bring back dinosaurs from the dead using merely a mosquito. I remember what a worldwide story it was when a sheep was cloned. It was seen as such a big deal, with Dolly even giving birth to lambs. I find in general, though, you have to do a lot to break my suspension of disbelief, especially in a fantasy or science fiction setting. There's no sound in space, but George Lucas recognized that the space battle scenes in Star Wars needed sound to make them more exciting, especially the explosion of the Death Star. He was also smart throughout the trilogies to make the Force as flexible as possible, so he could change the rules and introduce new Force abilities if he felt it made the scene work better, like Palpatine using it to shoot lasers from his fingers. Jimmy Neutron, Boy Genius, shows the characters breathing in outer space without astronaut outfits, which is obviously not realistic at all, but the image of them flying through space in their amusement park ships is such a delightful, childlike image that it's never been something that has bothered me. I think as long as it makes sense within the universe established in the films, it can be surprising how much a piece of fiction can get away with. Thank you for your question, Andrew.